decisions were made not to prosecute. And the questions it will have to answer is who made those decisions? How were those decisions transmitted to officials in the police and the National Prosecuting Authority?
Dr. Zaid Kimmie, the Executive Director of the Foundation for Human Rights. Thank you so much for joining us on both sides. What does the Foundation do? Let's start there.
The Foundation is a human rights organization, a civil society organization. So our mission is really to promote the rights enshrined in our Constitution and to ensure that those rights are protected and advanced. And we can do that in a number of ways, by supporting smaller community-based organizations, by doing some policy type work, and sometimes involving ourselves in litigation.
And certainly that is how the majority of South Africans would be aware of yourself and of the Foundation. The work that you've been doing in cases that grew out of the TRC almost 30 years ago, and cases that were supposed to be prosecuted, and that they've been simply taken a very, very long time. And you've also, the Foundation certainly has been looking at what the reasons for everything having taken this extended time, what those reasons might be.
Yeah, that I think is probably our most public-facing type of work. And as you say, after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission ended its work, there were a number of cases, several hundred, up to 300 we believe, that were handed over and were meant to be investigated and prosecuted.
Perhaps we should just remind some of our younger viewers that in the case of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, full disclosure was what led to a situation where you wouldn't be prosecuted. So if you were absolutely totally honest about what happened and you explained what had happened and your political role, because obviously there were certain things that are completely off limits and will always be off limits, rape for example, then you wouldn't be prosecuted.
Yeah, there had to be a political purpose behind the acts that you committed, and you had to provide, as you say, full disclosure. This was a judicial process, so there was a panel of 3 judges that would review your application. They would hear from the family members of the people who were killed or disappeared, or the victims in some cases, and then make a decision on whether to grant amnesty. It's important, I think, just to remember that that amnesty was complete. It was a complete amnesty against any criminal prosecution and also against any civil prosecution. So even if a family member felt aggrieved that you'd been granted this immunity, there was nothing they could do. It was a complete immunity. But of course, that was one side of the coin, and the other side was that where amnesty wasn't granted, the state then had an obligation to go out and investigate and, where possible, prosecute those cases. And that's what they failed to do.
For a lot of South Africans, obviously, not those who may have been directly related or family members, but for a lot of South Africans, they would have expected these cases for prosecution for it to take place in quite a short period of time, right? Because, this is a new state where a lot of the members of government may have faced up against the security police themselves.
Yes.
So one would imagine that justice would be swift.
Yes.
But this was a case of drift. South Africans then, got on with their lives and, dealt with Y2K and a new president after Mandela, and then, of course, the years of Jacob Zuma, now Cyril Ramaphosa. But the lives of those who, as I say, were directly involved, family members, they don't experience a sense of drift, they experience a sense of injustice.
Yes, I think there was an expectation that things would move along, but I think the family members were rapidly disabused of that notion. It was clear, I think by 2007, that there were going to be attempts to have some sort of additional amnesty process. So there was an attempt by the president at the time, Thabo Mbeki, to institute an alternative pardons process, and that was struck down by the court. But it was struck down on the basis.
No. Why do you think that he wanted this extended amnesty?
I think unfortunately, we're in the position where there's a lot of speculation and not a lot of hard evidence. It seems to be clear from some perspectives that there may have been a deal between the security forces and the ANC that there would be no prosecutions. And this amnesty was perhaps an attempt to give effect to that deal. We don't know what went into those negotiations because those were all done behind closed doors. And
this is pre-94, right?
This was, I would guess, pre-94 and possibly immediately after. The TRC began its work, I believe, in 1995, 96, and had finished by 1999, 2000.
So you've got a situation where a liberation movement would have faced down those very policemen who in many cases were responsible for criminal acts.
Yeah.
That there was simply no way of saying, well, this was within the ambit of the political war that we were fighting at the time, looking at it from their point of view, what they might say. And yet, that same liberation organization moves into government and cuts a deal. Why? Because South Africa has to look like, I don't know, a rainbow nation, or because there are going to be more stories. Someone says, well, I'm going to tell some stories as well.
The point is we don't know. Part of why the families and ourselves have been asking for this commission of inquiry for many years is that this is in some ways the first opportunity South Africa has to enforce the rule of law, to not decide that some crimes ought not to be prosecuted. Ostensibly in the national interest. You can do a bit of hand-waving and say it's best for everyone that these crimes aren't prosecuted and we all move forward. And making that decision, and remember, this is an extra legal decision. The TRC process, that granting of amnesty and the subsequent prosecution, that was a public process. Those were laws we passed. But the decision then to not prosecute particular cases, that's taken behind closed doors.
Sure.
It's never explained. And you could argue that this is the sort of ground zero of subsequent decisions. So when the arms deal comes around, is, well, we cannot prosecute some people, but by and large, we need to move forward. In the interests of national unity and reconciliation, let's all just forget about this and move on. And then I guess when state capture comes along,
do much the same.
You can do much the same. You have that in your back pocket.
Tony Blair not wanting to discuss sale of arms to Saudi Arabia.
Yes. It's
in the national interest of me not to tell you a thing.
Yeah. And so this is something that if we go back there, had maybe it's a sort of absurd counterfactual. But if we had stuck to the rule of law from the very beginning, it may have been harder to make these arguments that we need to look the other way and move forward because it's just too troublesome,
the
too
question
divisive.
Mark, is if you're one of those 300 cases, one gets looked the other way and the other one gets to court.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have questions.
Yes. And I think no one is naive enough to believe that there was any inevitability about this. It's not the case that every one of these cases would have been successfully prosecuted.
Absolutely.
there still had to be a decision made. It was the complete lack of effort to even get to the point where you make a decision that, sets these families off and keeps the issue alive.
But the ambit of the Commission of Inquiry that's on the horizon is also quite limited.
Well, it's limited in one sense. It's going to look their focus is not on the original crimes. Those, as far as possible, will take their course in courts, or in many cases, they will simply fade away because the perpetrators have died, the witnesses have died, there's nothing more to be done. The Commission of Inquiry is going to focus on that period from about 2003, where decisions were made not to prosecute. And the questions it will have to answer is, who made those decisions? How were those decisions transmitted to officials in the police and the National Prosecuting Authority? And who then followed those instructions? All of those, every step, being illegal.
Does the Foundation worry that the Commission becomes politicized?
I think it is a political question. I think very many of the people involved were senior political figures. We'll find out, I hope, in due course exactly who said what. It won't
be a case of a commission for score settling.
I hope not. I hope that many of the officials involved, the people who must have known that they were breaking the law when they were given an instruction, don't look at these cases, go and find something else to do. When they did that, they knew they were breaking the law, but they followed the orders they were given. We hope that some of those people will be able to come forward and say, this is what happened. We hope some of the political office bearers will have the character to come forward and say, this is what we did and why. This is why we thought it was a good thing to do, but we recognize maybe it was illegal, but this is why we thought it was in the national interest.
Or we simply followed instructions.
We all know that following instructions is no defense, unfortunately.
Absolutely.